Ian, si querés empezar, muchas gracias.
Bueno, hola, buenos días a todos y todas. Aquí estoy en directo de México. Estamos en una sala ya con gente. Por razones un poco técnica y de logística no se le puedo mostrar, pero ya hay varias personas. Y ya hay cuestionamientos sobre este webinario. Eh, Estamos acá para presentar, frente a la demanda y a la urgencia climática y social que hay en el mundo, para presentar movilizaciones que van a ver, se están preparando en junio en el marco del G7. Y los compañeros que están acá, que son de varios países del mundo, que son ciudadanos, activistas, científicos, que se reunieron, ellos se presentarán, cada uno y cada una, y que se juntaron para justamente denunciar la deuda climática que tiene el norte en contra del sur, y explicarán ellos mejores todas esas acciones. Acá estamos en directo del Foro Social Mundial de México, que es un encuentro donde se ve gente del mundo entero, donde se reúne la sociedad civil del mundo entero para discutir de varias temáticas. Lo interesante justamente es que como en este espacio se van a juntar las luchas, varias luchas, la lucha climática, la lucha social, la lucha fiscal, muchas luchas, y eso es interesante porque el intercambio de ideas entre sindicatos, asociaciones locales y muchas más organizaciones, movimientos de la base, eh, se juntan y discuten de cómo organizarse y sobre todo pensar otro mundo, un mundo con más justicia social, ecológica. Entonces voy a dejar ahora a hablar a Esteban, que Esteban es de Argentina. Nos conocimos en un evento anticolonialista en Marsella y esperemos poder colaborar juntos en el marco de la movilización de junio. Esteban, te dejo hablar.
Muchas gracias, Ian. Muchas gracias por la moderación del evento. Saludos a todos los compañeros y compañeras que están participando del Foro Social Mundial. Yo soy Esteban, soy de Argentina, pero hace 3 años que vivo en Alemania, después de tener que irme por las persecuciones políticas y amenazas de muerte que sufrimos varios que estábamos en la lucha contra el fracking en Vaca Muerta, contra las corporaciones, que muchas de ellas son multinacionales europeas y norteamericanas. Y en este caso nos estamos uniendo con movimientos de todo el mundo de primera línea, anti-extractivistas, pero también con movimientos sindicales y sociales, como mencionaba Ian, en una campaña que tiene un gran potencial porque nos une la justicia social con la justicia climática, detrás del objetivo de cancelar las deudas del sur global y exigirle al norte global que comience a pagar su deuda ecológica con el sur. Y para esto estamos organizando una movilización internacional de cara a la cumbre del G7 en Alemania en junio, uniendo los movimientos entre el sur y el norte global, y como ya dije, no solo movimientos ambientales, sino también con sindicatos y movimientos sociales, de manera que comencemos a parir en las calles un movimiento popular que pueda ejercer la presión política necesaria para empezar a cambiar un poco el sistema y empezar a generar, a través de la cancelación de las deudas del sur y la facilitación de permitir acción climática para financiar una transición ecológica justa y dejar bajo tierra los combustibles fósiles, y que de esa manera el norte global empiece a pagar una parte de su deuda climática con el sur. Así que, dicho esto, después profundizaremos más, pero le paso la palabra al próximo orador que Ian puede indicar. Gracias.
I think Ian is going to introduce our next person. I'd just like to check as well if all the interpretation is working, both live and on the Zoom. I saw one person say they are struggling. Is the interpretation working in the room? Are people able to access the Zoom?
Allô Cathy, l'interprétation fonctionne bien.
Please, can you silence your, yeah, turn the mic off. Thank you. All right.
Sí, entonces el próximo compañero que va a hablar, Rob, del Reino Unido, y que va a hablar en marco de Juliet for Climate.
Hi everyone, my name is Reb. I'm a 16-year-old climate activist with Extinction Rebellion DC. And here in DC, we're trying to target the IMF and the World Bank, which are headquartered here because they're imposing a massive amount of debt onto the global South, which is causing a lot of problems there and preventing social services and forcing many countries to open up to fossil fuel extraction, which is forcing them to do fossil fuel extraction, which is causing environmental destruction and climate change. And then the global North takes these fossil fuels, and the global North is responsible for 92% of global fossil fuel emissions. And the US alone is responsible for 40% of these emissions. So it's a huge problem, this inequity that the US and Europe are the ones controlling the IMF and World Bank, and they're the ones that have a climate debt to the global South because they're causing the climate change, and the US and Europe need to reverse this by canceling the debt of the global South so that we can have climate and social justice. So now I'm going to read a spoken word piece for you all. It's called Climate Colonialism. Climate colonialism in the global South. We're setting a fire that we must oust. Corporations extracting, contaminating, destroying homelands of indigenous peoples they're polluting. The US and Europe colonized the economy, giving the global South little autonomy, luring poor countries into a loan trap, impossible to get out, states running in laps. Loans illegally handed to dictators and fools, the IMF violating its own rules, trillions of dollars the global South owes, forced into austerity measures they never chose. Indebted places exposed to invading, companies drilling, fracking, and mining, stolen resources shipped to the global North, while fake climate promises are being put forth. Argentina decimated by the IMF, President Macri, to benefit himself, got the largest loan the IMF let, putting Argentina into massive deficit. Major restrictions preventing social services, Argentinians mobilizing against these disservices. Theft by multinational fossil fuel corporations to communities they must pay reparations. The global North contributes most to climate change, while the global South suffers from exploitative exchange. The US and Europe have an ecological obligation. Cancel the debt, protect all the nations. Thank you, everyone, and join the movement to cancel the debt for climate and social justice.
Muchas gracias, Rob. Voy a llamar a Sony. Sony es de África del Sur y es una activista del clima.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for this invitation to speak to all of you. I bring you solidarity greetings from the continent of Africa. I'm on the southern tip of Africa in South Africa. I don't speak for the entire continent, but I know that There are comrades, activists, and representatives from various countries on the call, and they share the sentiment of solidarity with you in the room on the call, but also solidarity for this campaign. This climate debt that is owed by the global North is a burden on the global South, has been for hundreds of years. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, the extraction has gone on unabated. So we are calling for the obligations of the global North to be settled. And it's settled by canceling the real financial debt of the global South. The debt is choking us. Our unemployment in our own country, South Africa, if you take an extended definition of unemployment, is almost 50%. Youth unemployment for 18 to 35s is over 62%. Inflation is high. Workers' wages are low. And the climate debt obligation that we have to pay is more than half of our annual budget. At the moment, our debt sits at almost, in a local currency, almost 4 trillion. But if we convert it to US, it's 500 billion. We're sitting at 500 billion rand, 500 billion US dollars, and it's about time that we make this call. This call is led by activists on the ground, specifically trying to rope in the worker movements and the worker formations to get behind it. If we are relieved of our obligation to pay this debt, we can improve the quality of life of our citizens. We were aware that during COVID, the global North behaved extremely despicably by hoarding the vaccines. The global South did not get equal access to the vaccines. And that was just for the pandemic. When climate change and the crisis is in full force, how will they react? So we cannot trust them to act responsibly. We want to take charge of our own destiny. We're calling for the cancellation of the debt. We're calling on global North countries to join us in this call. It's a demand of the global South to unshackle ourselves from this burden. And once we have this mechanism done, we will then be able to make some real progress to develop the continent in the way that it will be able to release its total potential. So I just want to leave you with one fact, an academic paper published in the beginning of this year, just value appropriation from the global South, from the global North on the global South for 25 years, beginning in January 1990 to December 2015, that's 25 years. The expropriation from the global North was $242 trillion. That number is so mind-boggling. If we only take the 2015 figure, it was 11 trillion. That was enough to wipe out global poverty 70 times over. 70 times over. So we're asking for your solidarity, for you to talk about this campaign, promote this campaign, join us in your own countries as we protest against the G7, the center of power, and then also as we make this campaign a reality at COP27. Join us so that we can unshackle ourselves from the burden that is the climate debt. Real activity, real campaign. Please join us. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Sony. Bueno, muy, muy interesante de tener también oídos del sur y de África. Dejo la palabra ahora a Katy. Y bueno, acá la gente está muy interesada y les saludamos.
Thank you, Ian. So my name's Kathy Allen, and I'm part of Extinction Rebellion Global. and spend most of my time in global campaigns and like acting as a kind of like admin on global campaigns. I'm just here to talk really about one thing, and that is like just as a reminder that perspective matters, that it matters who the narrator is, where the narrative is coming from, what the subplot is and what the main plot is. And I will like just try to go into that a little bit. And so where I live in the UK, largely what we experience here is the comfort and convenience of capitalism. By and large, very little connection or no connection is made between the conveniences and like comforts, the purchases and services that bless our lives, and the actual wreckage that these are causing to people and planet elsewhere. And of course, that suits the system. Capitalism needs that. It does not want us to feel like nervous or unsure of our purchases and lose confidence in the system. And to some extent, we could say that even the environmental messaging in the global north, to some extent, reflects the system. So whereas we experience largely convenience and comfort, similarly, our environmental messaging is not very focused on the actual realistic and practical horrors of living through capitalism in some other areas of the world. So what we prioritize tends to be quite conceptual, like carbon emissions, fossil fuels, and the future. And the experience of the global south largely is perceived as like an add-on or a subplot. Most affected areas and peoples, meanwhile, are spaces. Oh, I can hear. We need to like maybe silence some microphones. Most affected peoples and areas, meanwhile, these are places that have been fighting against like environmental wrecking, livelihood destruction, like contamination, extraordinarily blatant and like horrific injustice for, as Sunny said, you know, more than a century. And the experience of climate change itself is already decades old in many places. These voices, they carry anger, pain, and perhaps more than anything, they carry the voice, the authority of experience of what it is to fight the beast and where to attack it. So just a couple of things from this. It just seems a lot more likely that disruptive ideas about where to attack the beast of capitalism will come from outside the areas of comfort, like the complacent areas where life is pretty convenient, more likely to come from the places where the brutal ugliness of the system isn't hidden. These voices in any case tend to be like less vague, less conceptual, more bold and practical, as indeed we see here with Debt for Climate. And secondly, like if the global north unite behind the narrative of the global south, they are in a way taking a more disruptive position, because the standard order of capitalism is that some areas matter and other areas don't. So by putting the areas which are most affected at the front, we are turning backwards the natural order of capitalism, and we're stating that no one is less valuable than anybody else, which is fundamentally quite a disruptive thing to do, bizarrely, in capitalism. So, so just to say that I think that it really matters that Debt for Climate is emanating out of global South activism and not global North. I think that it's more likely the places to attack and begin to disrupt capitalism will be more readily observed from their perspective, from that perspective. And I think also that, like somebody once said to me something very powerful, and I repeat it here: if you want to change the narrative, change the narrator. So yeah, I think it's a helpful and disruptive perspective. Thank you very much. I pass to the next speaker.
Hola. Es Katy de XR. Muchas gracias. Exacto. Bueno, muchas gracias. Ahora voy a David, que quizás David va a contarnos de dónde venís y bueno, y un poco tu historia en poco tiempo. Gracias.
Bien, hola, un saludo con todas, todos, todes. No puedo prender la cámara, no me deja el sistema. ¿Me pueden ayudar con eso, por favor? Listo, arreglado, gracias. Un saludo muy afectuoso con todas las personas que se han unido al webinar de hoy. Para mí es un gusto gigantesco poder ser parte de este diálogo y comentarles un poco las perspectivas al respecto de la deuda que tienen los estados, principalmente el sur global, y su relación con la crisis climática. En ese sentido, lo primero que quiero hacer es felicitar a todos quienes me antecedieron en el uso de la palabra, con unas ponencias realmente especiales, muy, muy bonitas, que llegaron al corazón. Y comentarles un poco del trabajo que hacemos en Ecuador. Yo soy parte de organizaciones ecologistas en el sur global, que luchamos principalmente contra el avance del extractivismo en nuestros territorios. Soy parte de una ciudad que se llama Cuenca, en Ecuador, rodeada completamente por páramos, un ecosistema que tiene dos funciones ecosistémicas extremadamente importantes. La primera es la captura de carbono dentro de sus suelos y la segunda es la regulación del ciclo hídrico. Prácticamente decimos que los páramos son una especie de fábricas de agua que pues luego permiten que se vayan formando los ríos que terminan en la cuenca amazónica y de ahí la vital y la trascendencia que tienen, estos ecosistemas. Sin embargo, en el Ecuador, desde hace algunos años sufrimos el embate principalmente del extractivismo minero que está profundizándose dentro de estos ecosistemas y está amenazando terriblemente que sigan existiendo con los equilibrios ecológicos que permiten que sigan cumpliendo con esas funciones que yo les comenté. Y esto se relaciona directamente con la deuda. Lamentablemente, el Ecuador es un país que tiene una deuda externa entre la pública y privada que conforman casi el 50% de su PIB. Y esto pues ha impedido que avancen políticas claras, profundas y contundentes al respecto de la crisis climática dentro de nuestro estado. Y estoy seguro que hemos escuchado varias veces que la deuda que asumen los estados es una herramienta que permite el desarrollo de los mismos. Sin embargo, creo que los hechos, sobre todo analizados desde un punto de vista histórico, nos permiten tener claro que en realidad la deuda no es más que una estrategia del capitalismo global que permite que los países del sur global se sostengan y se mantengan todavía en un estado de dependencia absoluta del norte global y que además se profundicen los mecanismos de explotación, principalmente de la naturaleza y de los ecosistemas que existen dentro de los países del sur global. Y es así pues que, por ejemplo, en el caso ecuatoriano hay una situación muy grave y es que desde este año hasta el año 2026, el Ecuador tiene que pagar 43.000 millones de dólares de deuda externa, pues se están cumpliendo ya con los plazos establecidos para poder solventar estas deudas y la manera en la que el Estado ecuatoriano está resolviendo poder sostener y poder pagar estas deudas no es más que profundizando su modelo extractivista, principalmente la explotación petrolera. Pero ante la ausencia o ante el límite de la explotación petrolera en el Ecuador, se ha profundizado también el modelo minero, principalmente de la minería metálica a gran escala, propiciado y explotado por las grandes empresas transnacionales. En el Ecuador tenemos una presencia bastante grande de empresas canadienses, de empresas chinas, de empresas australianas, que están pues acabando con los ecosistemas como les mencionaba anteriormente. Y como muestra de aquello es pues que el actual gobierno de Ecuador, que es un gobierno absolutamente neoliberal, alineado a las políticas capitalistas del gran mercado internacional, ha tomado dos decisiones por medio de dos decretos ejecutivos para profundizar el modelo extractivo en el Ecuador. El primero de estos es el decreto 95, con el cual prevé y planifica que se duplique la explotación petrolera en el Ecuador, es decir, pasar de los 500.000 barriles diarios al 1.000.000 de barriles diarios de petróleo explotados y por supuesto también comercializados. Y por otro lado, el decreto 151, con el cual pues están tratando de que los trámites administrativos para concesionar y explotar los territorios dentro del Ecuador para la minería metálica se lo realicen en tiempos récord, en un tiempo mucho más corto de lo que se hacían antes, y esto pues implica saltarse algunas regularizaciones, principalmente regularizaciones ambientales, para poder impedir que efectivamente la explotación minera se limite por las afectaciones y los impactos ambientales, incluso bajo la luz de la Constitución ecuatoriana que reconoce los derechos de la naturaleza. Y esto pues en un marco global, ¿no? En el que estamos tratando justamente de hacer frente a la crisis climática, que no es más que la consecuencia del desarrollo y del modelo pues de producción, de comercialización, de distribución, de consumo y también de gestión de residuos a nivel global, bajo las lógicas del capitalismo. Y pues la deuda, la gran deuda externa que ha sido propiciada por el norte global, profundiza estos mecanismos y estos modelos que no hacen más que en los países del sur global profundicemos el extractivismo como un modelo de Estado, como un modelo también de gestión económica y de gestión de nuestras sociedades y sobre todo como un modelo mediante el cual nos relacionamos con los ecosistemas en los cuales estamos habitando. De ahí que la propuesta de deuda por el clima toma una fuerza absolutamente relevante y que tiene que principalizarse en las agendas de todos los sectores y organizaciones sociales del sur global y que tiene que ser escuchado por los sectores del norte global. Porque necesitamos transformar este mecanismo que ha profundizado la dependencia de los países del sur global hacia los países del norte global por medio justamente de la emisión de bonos, la emisión de deuda por parte de instituciones como el FMI, el Banco Mundial o estados o los mismos estados. En el caso del Ecuador tenemos una deuda bastante grande con China. Siga siendo un mecanismo con el cual someten a los estados del sur global y someten también a cualquier intento de profundizar políticas por parte de estos países para poder hacer frente a la crisis climática. En ese sentido, también necesitamos que se transforme esta deuda externa que tienen los países del sur global en una deuda ecológica que tienen los países del norte global hacia los países del sur global y permita pues que exista una transferencia de financiamiento bastante interesante para para que los países del sur global puedan profundizar sus políticas ecológicas, porque tienen que ser políticas ecológicas, no únicamente políticas ambientales, tienen que ser políticas ecológicas que entiendan la trascendencia y la relevancia que tiene la relación entre las sociedades humanas hacia los ecosistemas que habitamos, hacia la biodiversidad que estamos explotando todo el tiempo y que permite el sostenimiento de las economías humanas. En ese sentido necesitamos transformar profundamente y no lo podemos hacer si es que el norte global no reconoce y no asume la deuda ecológica que tiene con el sur global. Y ahí pues necesitamos avanzar también en otras propuestas que son cruciales y que van de la mano. Entre ellas políticas de decrecimiento económico, políticas que permitan entender que no podemos seguir sosteniendo una economía que avasalle y que vulnere los mismos límites biofísicos que tiene el planeta que habitamos y que por lo tanto destruya, por así decirlo, y creo que es la manera más adecuada de explicarlo, que destruya la lógica con la cual estamos manejando la economía global. La deuda del norte global, la deuda ecológica del norte global tiene que ser asumida, tiene que ser además respetada y tiene que ser garantizada hacia los países del sur global para poder construir políticas sociales, políticas ecológicas que apunten hacia la justicia ecosistémica, hacia la justicia ecosocial y que nos permitan transitar hacia modelos sociales, económicos y políticos que respeten esos límites biofísicos y que además permitan construir sociedades mucho más justas con el planeta y con todas las personas que somos parte de él. De ahí, pues, extendemos una invitación general a todas las personas que quieran ser parte de esto y que quieran sumarse sobre todo a este momento importantísimo que vamos a vivir en junio, que son las grandes manifestaciones en contra del G7, que tendrán, pues, como su foco o su sede justamente la reunión del G7, pero que también tendrán manifestaciones en cada uno de los países, haciendo notar que estamos exigiendo y que no podemos cambiar nuestro discurso, sino sostener que el norte global tiene que asumir su deuda ecológica con el sur global. Eso, muchísimas gracias y espero encontrarnos nuevamente en otro espacio.
Muchas gracias, David. Muy interesante de tener voz de Ecuador. Acá tenemos también compañeros de Colombia y de Brasil y de varias otras partes. Ahora voy a llamar a Lisa. Lisa de
Thanks.
Alemania. Hola,
Yeah,
Lisa.
thank
Te
you.
dejo presentarte.
Cool. Yeah, hi, I'm Lisa. I'm from Germany, actually Munich, which is the city closest to the G7 summit in June. I'm part of a platform which is called the Stop G7, so Stop G7 platform. It's a loose collaboration of different groups which are organizing protests against the G7 summit, as we think the G7 is trying to assume a role of a non-legitimized world government. We reject the G7 as a concept in total because we think it's just imperialist states and their supporters who are doing oppressive politics of injustice, destruction, militarization, and climate destruction. So we think that it's time that we build a democratic world in which governments don't just protect their destructive corporations, and that we end the system of oppression and exploitation. So we think that it's time that we unite against those who decide to destroy our world on a daily basis, who are just deciding to rob the world and to plunder the global north on a daily basis, which are the owners of the corporations. We have different goals, which is climate justice, peace, and end of neocolonialism, free vaccine patents, which I think Sunny has already talked about. We want fair care work, we want open borders and food autonomy. And even though we're a mixed group of anti-capitalist groups and reformists, we all stand united behind your initiative, Debt for Climate, because we think it's really powerful. And I think what's probably most powerful about it is to show the imperial structures that are at work, because I think in Germany, nobody's really aware of what's happening. Everybody's like, oh, colonialism is a thing of the past. And was Germany actually even involved? I thought it was England and France. And I think it's time that we make visible to the people how much it is still at work, how there are very, to us maybe not non-visible, but very staggering systematic issues word well, how there are still systematic issues behind this. It's probably going to happen that the imperialist states, for example, Germany as well, and the US will not be interested in canceling the debt. But I think it's extremely powerful if we as the people unite globally behind this. And if we show them that what we want is solidarity among the peoples of the earth, and solidarity means also climate justice, and climate justice means that the global north finally pays their debt, and the global north stops destroying the earth, especially the corporations. And I think climate justice means that we really start freaking out those corporations and show them that they can't go on like this. So we want to make the strong protests of the global south visible in our demonstrations, which are on the weekend of the G7, but also in a single action that is just dedicated to this issue. So another thing is that some of us or many of us are probably new to international work. So I think we have a lot to learn on the way, but I'm really excited for this. And I think that together as a global movement, we can create something huge. And so I'm really thrilled about being here. Thanks for having me. And it's really interesting to hear you all. Thank you.
Let me just take over for a second. Thank you very much, Lisa. That was very, very interesting and inspiring. I think Ian is maybe coming on in a minute, but while we wait, can I just remind everybody that if they'd like to ask a question, please pop your question in the chat in whichever language, and we'll try to get to those as much as possible. Juan Pablo, I now invite you to take the floor. Great, thank you.
Muchas gracias, Katy. Muchas gracias a todos los compañeros y compañeras presentes en este webinar. Gracias a los compañeros que están organizando la actividad para el Foro Social Mundial de México. Un saludo para el encuentro en México. Un saludo para los compañeros y compañeras de distintos países del mundo. Creo que a esta altura ya va quedando claro quiénes somos. Esta campaña global Deuda por Clima tiene algunas características específicas, que es la globalidad de nuestro movimiento, en el sentido de que el Fondo Monetario Internacional tiene una agenda internacional y tiene un modus operandi delictivo cuya metodología es avanzar con sus estrategias de préstamos compulsivos a los países del sur global para generar, como decía David y otros compañeros, una dependencia económica. Y el caso de Argentina, yo estoy en Buenos Aires, Argentina, y nos hemos movilizado en contra del acuerdo entre el gobierno argentino y el Fondo Monetario Internacional, que significó una estafa al pueblo argentino, una conspiración entre los funcionarios del Fondo Monetario Internacional y el gobierno de Macri, que ahora fue un acuerdo también aceptado por el actual gobierno de el mayor préstamo en la historia del fondo, de 44.000 millones de dólares que en su totalidad se destinaron a la fuga, pero que sin embargo significó un peso sobre nuestra economía y un cogobierno con funcionarios del Fondo Monetario, con una oficina en el Banco Central de Argentina, en donde el Fondo Monetario va a definir cuáles van a ser nuestras políticas sociales y económicas para los próximos 12 años. La pregunta es, en el caso de Argentina, en el caso de otros países de América Latina, en el caso de África, ¿vamos a tener oportunidad de transitar un camino de adaptación y de mitigación de los efectos del calentamiento global si tenemos sobre nuestras economías el peso de deudas ilegítimas que nos van a condenar por décadas hacia adelante? Entonces ahí es el diagnóstico que tenemos, que es un diagnóstico de una crisis muy profunda de este sistema de opresión, este sistema colonialista, el sistema capitalista, racista, patriarcal, que es un diagnóstico muy claro de que nos está llevando a la crisis de la sexta extinción masiva. Estamos uniéndonos en un movimiento de internacionalismo solidario para reaccionar por la supervivencia de nuestros pueblos, porque de continuar este modelo de un nuevo orden mundial que va a seguir oprimiendo a nuestros pueblos, con deudas ilegítimas, ¿cuáles van a ser las oportunidades que tengamos desde el sur global para generar herramientas de contención social y de garantía de derechos a la salud, a la educación, a alimentos? Entonces, como nuestras realidades son muy dramáticas, es que nos unimos para hacer este diagnóstico de la actual crisis del capitalismo, que ya es una crisis desde su nacimiento. ¿Por qué hay un protagonismo de las voces del sur global? Por el nacimiento mismo del capitalismo, de este modelo que ya en la revolución industrial generó las bases del actual calentamiento global, y fue especialmente un sistema que nació en base a genocidios de las poblaciones de América del Sur, originarias, y de África. Esto está presente en toda América Latina, está presente en México, en la trágica historia del genocidio de México, de las poblaciones originarias. 10 millones de personas de pueblos originarios fueron asesinados para sentar las bases del sistema de saqueo y opresión que lleva muchos siglos, más de 540 años. 12 millones de poblaciones de afrodescendientes que los trajeron como esclavizados para continuar ese modelo. Entonces, nosotros estamos convocando a un gran movimiento de internacionalismo solidario que denuncie fuertemente este modelo de opresión, estas herramientas de colonialismo financiero, de colonialismo económico, de colonialismo climático, que de continuar en los próximos años va a condenar a nuestras regiones y a nuestra población a ser territorios de sacrificio, a ser población sobrante, a que alrededor de la mitad de la población mundial, 5.000 millones de personas, no se puedan adaptar y sean migrantes climáticos de este sistema que va oprimiendo cada vez más a mayores sectores de la población. Entonces, desde Argentina alzamos nuestra voz para decir no al poder opresor del Fondo Monetario, del Banco Mundial, del Club del París, del G7, que son mecanismos para aceitar estas metodologías de opresión que pesan sobre nuestros territorios, sobre nuestra población, sobre los pueblos originarios, que son las principales víctimas desde el origen del modelo. Entonces es un modelo que nace con genocidios y que se dirige hacia genocidios, porque ¿qué va a pasar con las 4.500 millones de personas que no puedan acceder a agua potable, que no puedan acceder a alimentos? Nos urge unirnos en un solo músculo, en un solo puño, en un solo movimiento global que frene a los poderes opresores que pretenden condenarnos a ser víctimas de ese modelo de a cientos de miles, de a millones. No queremos ser víctimas, no queremos ser cómplices de este modelo. Admiramos las luchas de América Latina, de África y de los movimientos sociales y ambientales de los países del norte global que se solidarizan y se comprometen con esta lucha. Ese es el único camino que nos va a permitir de acá en adelante a los próximos 10 años la supervivencia de los pueblos y un modelo de mundo alternativo que no nos condene a este colonialismo, a esta opresión y a un futuro que en realidad pone en juego la supervivencia de la especie. Por eso un movimiento global, por eso cuestionamos las deudas y por eso ponemos en el centro de la escena la deuda ecológica, la necesidad de promover a nivel mundial justicia social y justicia climática. Muchísimas gracias, todos invitados, se necesita de la participación de todas y todos. Un abrazo de lucha, un abrazo de solidaridad, un abrazo de compromiso, un abrazo de esperanza, y estando todos juntos en un solo punto de encuentro, me parece que vamos a construir un movimiento de esperanza y un escenario de vida digna para nosotros y las futuras generaciones. Creo que vamos por buen camino y están todos y todas invitados a sumarse. Un gran abrazo.
Wow, thank you, Juan Pablo, as always. And now I invite Rob to take the floor. Just to say, I see somebody has their hand up, but we will wait till the end. Please put your questions in the chat. Thank you.
Hi, Kathy.
Hello.
Can you enable my camera?
Let me try. There you go.
Hi. First, I just want to say thank you so much to Juan Pablo. That was beautifully spoken, and it's difficult to follow that, but thank you to everyone who's spoken today. It's hard to really add, except for adding detail, more and more detail, and hopefully more and more weight to what we need to do right now. Debt, I think one of the simplest ways of thinking about debt is that debt is a tool of power. Now, power can be used to lift up the marginalized, but right now, and for a while now, power has been used to leverage inequality to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. So I want to tell a story about 1943, which sums this up really well. In 1943 was an event that's come to be known as the Bengal Famine. It should really be called the Bengal Genocide, because UK policies, including the way in which the British government leveraged debt in Bengal, which is now modern day Western India and Bangladesh, led to areas of land and the crops being used to service the foods that were exotic foods for people in the cities in the UK and some cities across Europe. They stopped growing crops for themselves, and because of pricing, because of the way in which the country began to be in debt through the colonial policies of the UK, it was only profitable for them to actually sell their food crops for the UK market. It would actually cost them more money to try and keep the crops for themselves just to eat. So they had to make a choice between selling crops to make enough money that they hoped would get them through to the next winter, to the next harvest, or between keeping crops for themselves to eat, but having absolutely no money. And of course, at the same time, massive inflation and government policies driven by high debts ended up completely crippling that. Coupled with a few weather events, over 3 million people were killed in one year alone. So that's the sort of thing that climate change is going to bring. One of the things that terrifies me as someone in the global north is that right now, everything that's going on in the global north is the same. It's the same as the Bengal famine. What's going to happen with climate policies is that we will continue to exploit areas of the south to make sure that people in the global north, as Kathy called it, remain comfortable long enough so there is not enough political unrest to change the system that fundamentally is held up here by places of power in the global north, New York, the City of London, places where policies, financial policies, are written. So we need to do something about this, something enormous, because right now, the way in which the environmental movements are working has been focused on what I call the hydra, the heads of the hydra. Every time you chop one off, there are many, many more that just grow back. But debt gets you right to the heart of the beast. And I think a lot of this, I find it, after what Kathy said about changing the narrator, I want to change the narrator and amplify Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso. A lot of this is about transforming people's attitudes to debt. Now, in the global north, people have a very different attitude to debt than in the global south. And one of the big things we need to teach is that cancellation has been done. In fact, it's done often, but it is the use of debt as a tool of power on the scale that it is being used now, that 54 countries, if you include Ukraine, it's 55, are in debt distress or have already defaulted on their debts. You can already see how that's affecting Sri Lanka right now. Debt weighs down like a knee on the neck, and we need to take it off. And this movement is one of the ways we can do it. And for those watching all around the world, yes, please join the Debt for Climate movement. Get involved, Get into the chats, talk to people about how you can organize in your local area. If you're in the UK, please join the Jubilee for Climate group as well, and I will link you to that afterwards. We're all working to build this, what Thomas Sankara called the transformation of people's attitudes, because that is exactly what needs to happen here. And as we go and work on the G7 later on, that's exactly what we need to do, absolutely transform people's attitudes to debt. Because right now we are going in the wrong direction. There is a UK committee that was just started 1 week ago or 2 weeks ago, which is looking at debt for nature swaps. And what a debt for nature swap is, it's where they say that they will cancel the debt of a certain country in return for a certain area of land being left apparently pristine. But historically, as the work of Survival International, but many groups and many indigenous groups are constantly telling us what this ends up doing is pushing people, indigenous people, people who live on the land, from their land. And where do they end up? Well, they end up being driven into dependent relationships, i.e. they start paying rent. They're paying rent to people, to capitalists, to people who have money already. They end up in debt relationships. And that is exactly how the system is working. That is what centralization has been for these last years. That is part of the nature of colonization, enforcing a debt relationship. So yes, the global north absolutely needs to understand the debt that it owes. It now needs to reverse that debt. It needs to pay its debt, because the climate debt, what has been done to the climate, is utterly terrifying and appalling. And so we need to keep working. This is one of the great movements that can do that. This is the thing that gives me hope, the thing that gives me vision. And this work goes also into your movements. I absolutely beg you, take the understanding that's been given to you today so eloquently, Sunny, Juan Pablo, Esteban, Kathy, everyone who's spoken today, and take it further. We all need to educate ourselves about how this system is working. And we need to get past the jargon. That's why I begin with a story about the Bengal famine. This is real. People are suffering. We need to be able to reinterpret what's the experience going on around us. Because right now in the UK, we're also in a debt crisis. There's a cost of living crisis right here in the UK. The poorest people are suffering. Meanwhile, oil companies are recording windfall profits. So again, we're talking about a great divide, the use of debt as power. And this is something that we absolutely need to change. And that narrative is something that people all over the world can understand and get behind. Taking power back, bringing our freedom and dignity back, as Juan Pablo said it. And this Debt for Climate movement is one of the great ways to do it. And it goes much further than just the sort of environmentalism that climate has come to mean. It's almost like climate has become too small a word now. Now we can make it even bigger with this connection, debt and climate. Hope and vision is there. And so in the words, I want to leave not with my own words, but in the words, 2 quotes from Thomas Sankara. One is that Sankara said beautifully, there is enough money always to drill wells thousands of meters deep for oil. But why is there never enough money to drill wells hundreds of meters deep for water? And the final quote is, freedom is not given, but won through struggle. Please, please, don't sit back. Don't wait for the famine. Join the struggle now.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Very inspiring as always. Thank you very much. And yeah, I see there's loads of clapping going on. Esteban, would you like to round up for us?
Sí, muchas gracias, Katy. Gracias, Rob. Excelente presentación. Bueno, yo creo que lo único que se puede agregar después de tantos participantes que aclararon los distintos aspectos y de lugares tan distintos de la campaña, ¿no? Perspectivas desde Sudáfrica, Argentina, Ecuador, Alemania, Inglaterra, Washington. Es que lo que nosotros estamos armando ahora y que estamos invitando a todos y todas para sumarnos, es una campaña que no va a terminar con el G7, sino que va a empezar. En el G7 en junio vamos a parir esto en las calles por primera vez y de ahí tenemos una visión de mediano y largo plazo para seguir construyendo un puente entre las fuerzas sindicales, sociales y ambientales, porque entendemos que es la única forma de construir la fuerza necesaria y masiva en las calles, porque tenemos que ser millones de personas en las calles de todo el mundo para lograr los cambios necesarios en un contexto de crisis civilizatoria y de extinción, de la sexta extinción masiva a la que nos enfrentamos. Así que volver a invitarlos a todos y todas a sumarse, a participar. Esta campaña es no solo impulsada desde el sur global, sino también desde las bases de los movimientos sociales, ambientales y sindicales, donde tenemos y queremos trabajar con todas las ONG y todos los grupos que ya vienen trabajando en distintos temas de la deuda, pero tiene que quedar claro que la agenda de este movimiento no nos lo van a marcar ni desde el norte global ni desde ninguna ONG. Y eso tiene que quedar muy claro porque hace a la independencia y a la dignidad de la campaña que queremos construir, que tiene que ser una fuerza emancipadora. Así que gracias a todos y todas por venir y abrimos el espacio para responder preguntas.
Oh, thank you, Esteban. I'm not sure if you felt that you needed to finish earlier because was that a sudden ending? Had you finished, Esteban? Were you all right?
Yes, Kathy, I'm done. I was just wrapping up. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. I'd just like to invite Sunny to help come now and facilitate the questions and ending. And if all the speakers could turn their cameras on, that would be great. Oh, is Ian back?
I'm sure you were all very inspired by the messages, the solidarity, but more so by the global intent of what we hope to achieve. So I'm sure you have lots to think about. There's a lot of information on our website. It's in the text, in the chat boxes. So now, if there are any questions, I'll take the questions and then pass it on to the relevant speakers. Kathy, do you want to check the
I think Charlie, let me put Charlie on. Charlie, would you like to read out one of the questions? And then if all the speakers can put their video on, I'm sure we can field those questions. Thank you, Sunny. Oh, great. And I will try to find you and pin you all.
Okay. Gracias, Kathy. Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to read the question in Peru. This comes from Dennis. Cuestionar el capitalismo corporativo y el capitalismo de Estado, pese a que muchas de las izquierdas de Latinoamérica no suma que esa adherencia a este tipo de movimientos o que se confunda esta justa reclamación con las luchas políticas. Menciona que habría que deslindar para que no se genere que no se instrumentalice la causa. Y la pregunta específica de Denis sería, ¿cómo hacer para denunciar que el modelo capitalista, pero a la vez que no se adhiera al marxismo u otras corrientes?
That's a brilliant question. Juan Pablo, do you want to tackle it? Fundamentally, it's saying, how does our message not get lost between the dichotomy of capitalism and Marxism? So I think you're suited to answer that question.
Sí, claro. Muchas gracias, Sani. Muchas gracias, Charlie. Y gracias, Denis, por la pregunta. Excelente pregunta. Desde nuestro espacio Deuda por Clima, lo que decimos es que el aspecto que has mencionado como la primera parte de la pregunta es denunciamos al extractivismo como un extractivismo depredador de los recursos naturales, de la naturaleza, de los ecosistemas, y es un capitalismo depredador que está llevando al límite de la capacidad de la tierra para ser explotada. Ante ese escenario de crisis política, social y económica, pensando conjuntamente con vos, te diría que hay una profunda crisis existencial civilizatoria y por lo tanto crisis política también. No tenemos una fórmula para decir cómo en cada territorio o en cada país se puede aplicar una respuesta. Lo que nosotros enfatizamos es apoyar todas las luchas que denuncian el extractivismo, el saqueo de los recursos, y apoyar las luchas que avanzan hacia la justicia social y la justicia climática. Y entendemos que en cada país una de las claves es el ejemplo que estamos transitando: participación, solidaridad, compromiso, y entender que debe haber una construcción colectiva en cada territorio de alternativas a lo que existe como el poder cómplice del capitalismo en cada territorio. Nosotros tenemos que construir participación, solidaridad y ponernos a tu disposición y a disposición de todos los compañeros y compañeras que están buscando alternativas y buscando soluciones y buscando salida a esta profunda crisis política, social. Por eso me parece que en tu pregunta está uno de los grandes temas de cómo no repetir fórmulas antiguas y cómo crear nuevas soluciones a esta profunda crisis civilizatoria, económica, política, social, cultural y sobre todo climática y social. Ofrecemos pensar conjuntamente, colectivamente, y buscar con vos la construcción de alternativas a lo que vos planteás en tu pregunta. No sé si te pude responder en parte. Muchísimas gracias.
Thanks, Juan Pablo. I may just want to add and take the advantage of being the facilitator. So, a few years ago, we didn't understand this concept of climate justice. It's a relatively new concept. And I only mentioned that to highlight a lesson. As we fight against this existential risk that has the potential to annihilate civilization, we mustn't get bogged down in the labels. There will be those with narrow agendas that will seek to push us in a certain direction and take our time and our energy and sap our energy by allowing us to concentrate on definitions. So whilst our call is justifiably left-leaning, we mustn't get caught up in that discussion, because the new narratives and the new language of climate justice and eco-socialism is being birthed even as we speak. We are in a seminal moment in history where we are actually redefining and creating new conversations. We're almost doing what Katie said. The narrative is we are now beginning in our effort to replace the narrators, the narrators of the story. We will find the vocabulary as we move forward, but we must not forget that we must hold space and hold energy, because the fight is bigger than anything we've ever done before. So labeling old ways, everything is going to be new, because we are going to need new thinking and innovation, grounded in left thinking perhaps, but not distracted by it. Can we take another question, Charlie, if there is? Kathy, I also want to find out what is the idea of time? How long do we have the interpreters for, and for how long can we go?
Yeah, we have about another 20 minutes, but if we want to wrap up like at the end, if you want to do like a quick couple of minutes at the end, let's say we have 15 minutes for sure.
Okay. Charlie, are there any more questions?
Yeah, Sunny, there's one question from Leuven from Nigeria. He asked, the capitalists have a strategy of using local collaborators to perpetrate their nefarious activities. How do we handle the collaborators without disrupting internal economic strides, as many indigenous people are made to believe?
So Leuven, Nigeria, I'm, as you know, in South Africa, very, very pertinent question, but very, very relevant, and also a tactic and a tool that the capitalists will use to distract us. They will fund competing voices. They will buy off our activists and our agents. So how we combat that is by always, first of all, telling the truth always. building alliances with respectable truth-telling activists, doing nothing ourselves in the dark and underhanded, behaving ethically at all times so that we set the bar really, really high, and then calling out the collaborators. They already face danger. They already faced, they already are on a short thread. We need to make sure that our activities are always above board. We are always telling the truth. And in this particular case, we must occupy and expose as much as possible. But we also need to build collaborative structures so that we're never, ever alone and not in the dark. So, to be careful that this campaign and this whole movement can be hijacked and be always aware of it. So that's my sense of how I think we combat it. But other speakers may have some ideas. Maybe Juan Pablo, Kathy, and Rob, maybe you guys can add from your own experiences having worked in Africa, and Juan Pablo having worked with very sensitive campaigns in South America, specifically in Argentina. Anyone?
Who would like to speak on that one? Would anyone like to add something? Yes, go, David.
Thank you, David.
Claro, con gusto. Me parece una pregunta bastante interesante. En el caso de Ecuador, yo creo que una de las cosas que nos ha servido bastante para poder hacer frente a los colaboradores, principalmente de las grandes empresas y las corporaciones extractivistas, es trabajar mano a mano con las comunidades para demostrar que existen alternativas distintas a las que propone el capitalismo extractivista, ¿no? Cuando llega una empresa minera a un territorio, a una comunidad, generalmente llegan con el discurso del progreso y el desarrollo económico. Y esto viene de la mano con unos salarios grandes, fuertes y bastante representativos que hacen, por ejemplo, que cambie la lógica de comunidades que trabajan en la tierra, es decir, de agricultoras y agricultores, de campesinas y campesinos, y se transformen en proletarias y proletarios de las grandes empresas. Además, siendo parte de esta lógica muy compleja, ¿no? Y muy complicada de la acumulación que proponen estas empresas extractivas, que a la final lo que hacen es permitir que perpetúe la lógica capitalista dentro de estos territorios comunitarios. En ese sentido, pues, lo que hemos hecho es justamente trabajar de la mano de estas comunidades para poder demostrar que sus propios procesos y sus propios mecanismos que anteriormente utilizaban, que son los mecanismos y las lógicas comunitarias mediante el desarrollo de propuestas como, por ejemplo, la agroecología o el turismo comunitario, es una manera bastante adecuada y bastante eficiente para poder desarrollar un proceso de economía local que haga frente a esta propuesta de economía capitalista que viene a ser implantada por parte de las grandes empresas extractivas. Eso nos ha servido, y de hecho nos ha servido mucho más que llegar directamente con este mensaje anticapitalista o anti-extractivista, ¿no? Porque muchas veces estas comunidades no lo entienden desde esa perspectiva, no lo entienden desde sus lenguajes y no lo entienden desde esas narrativas, pero sí lo entienden desde el lenguaje de la satisfacción de sus necesidades más básicas. Porque aquí hay que decir otra cosa, y es que el Estado está muy ausente en estos territorios. Y cuando llegan estas empresas, llegan a suplantar el rol del Estado en cuanto a la generación de servicios para satisfacer los derechos más básicos como educación y salud. Pero tratamos de demostrar que mediante la acción colaborativa, la acción comunitaria y la relación entre los sectores urbanos y los sectores rurales, se pueden fortalecer o reconstruir estas alternativas comunitarias para hacer frente a esta lógica desarrollista que tienen las empresas extractivistas y así poder hacer frente a su vez al capitalismo que quieren imponer mediante los proyectos extractivos. Tal vez este ejemplo de Ecuador pueda servir como respuesta a esa pregunta.
Thank you, David. Well said. Yeah, we must always watch our backs. Collaborators are always out to stick a knife in it. Charlie, if there are no longer any questions, is it possible?
We do have, Sunny, one last question.
Okay,
that
and then
was
I'll do
also
the wrap up
supported.
afterwards.
Great. So the question is, this is from Ciencia Local. How can we bring together research groups from all over the world to demand that the data measured by the oil companies before and during the extraction be freely accessible and use the power of science to protect our ecosystems?
Maybe I'll take a stab at it by saying that, first of all, we must rely on the science, we must rely on the data, and we must share it as much as we can. If we can't build a platform, then we must make sure that at least we begin to share it openly. We must develop collaborative relationships with journalists, trusted journalists, and media organizations where we can disseminate that information. But I think it's high time that we create ourselves an open source platform similar to WikiLeaks, EcoLeaks, and start to publish this documentation openly and go onto radio stations, go onto talk shows, go onto the internet, and begin to engage with the data. We seem to have a lot of access to the IPCC reports. When it's released, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of discussion, but we must keep the momentum going. And then we must be encouraged by recent developments around XR scientists and Scientist Rebellion and those organizations that are speaking truth to power. We must make sure that we popularize them, support them, amplify their voices so that the data, the science, the research, and the literature is really available. We must also try to break through the high cost of accessing that data, either through the cost of digital data or through the cost of access and the cost of having to pay for research documentation. So there's also allied fights that are taking place to break down those barriers behind paywalls, because this data is required. It's almost like locking up the library. We must create an open source library where that data can be freely accessible to everyone on the planet without hesitation. We have a campaign in South Africa where we lobby the cell phone companies to make certain educational material freely available without cost. We must do the same thing for climate data. We had a sit-in recently at a media, the organization that is a representative body of media, newspaper organizations and television organizations, to say we know the price of gold, we know the price of oil, and we know the temperature daily, but we don't know what the ppm rate in the atmosphere is. It is as important as we need to know what methane is we're exposed to, what pollutants we are exposed to. So we must encourage citizen science across the world so that it's free access to data and to information, specifically those that pose an existential risk to our humanity and our existence. I hope I've covered it.
Oh, Sunny, Rob has his hand up.
Rob? You're on mute, Rob.
I wanted to go in another direction with that question as well, because I agree with everything you said. And I would add that we're in an interesting situation in the world right now, I think, where people, where is science and where is this knowledge most effective? And I think it's most effective as a tool for the people on the ground. It's as a tool to raise consciousness. Again, and we shouldn't make the mistake of that terrible Netflix movie, make the mistake that you've got a scientific report and then you can go to the president of the United States and things will change. It absolutely won't. These people have known about the science for a long time, and for them, they want to keep it from coming out. But there's also another thing here that I think goes to a previous question as well about co-option and other things. I think that emphasis on the local is really important. The locality and power to the people is very, very important. It can take us beyond the jargon that people will use to divide us. And that's really, really something that we can believe in our vision, because that's something that we really need. All the science around thriving communities and all the science around nature means that, we need to take back local power and local responsibility. And the science plays a vital role in that. And I think we see this. I've had recently with what we're doing in local communities in the UK, we see this a lot. We come across a lot of people who have sort of what I would argue is a sort of center anti-establishment feeling. They could be pushed either left or right. And at the moment, the right wing and the if you know the scandals of Trump and Cambridge Analytica and all the stuff that they're using to manipulate things, they're working on that really well to the right. But what they really, these people, when you speak to them, the freedom people in the UK, they're called the freedom marchers. What they really want is freedom. What they don't like is the idea, it's not so much about the vaccine. It's more about who's Bill Gates? Why are these people making money out of us? Same with the oil companies. Why are these people making money out of us? If we can harness it and we can do that right, then and we can raise the consciousness in the right way, then we're going to get the people involved, because those marches are huge and these are real people who really care. And this is something that we really need, that feeling. And so we've got to be tactical, we've got to be strategic. Everything we said, all of these things are tools of power. They can be used against us, or we can use them really well. And I think debt, and there's a morality in there as well, can guide us and keep us really, really somewhere strong and deep.
Thanks, Rob. So even in that, I neglected to mention the respect for Indigenous knowledge. So we must always respect Indigenous knowledge and amplify it. And it's normally, we find out that it reinforces the science as well. So fantastic. So I'm going to do the wrap up because I know that we said we're going to go till 7:30. So I want to thank the speakers, Kathy. I want to thank every speaker that made an effort, that prepared, that spoke passionately and from the heart. The speakers who shared personal stories and experiences. We have deep respect for the lived experiences of people on the front line. So we want to have a shout out to them. I want to thank the youth especially, because I'm so encouraged. I wrote in the space that I'm encouraged that they are talking about decolonialism, talking about anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism. I'm really, really encouraged that they take up these challenges, and I wish them well, because when you bite into this salad, there's lots of different tastes. Get excited. And remember that the older activists like ourselves, who have years and years of experience, are inspired by you, and we listen to you. And I always say to them, we are now being led adequately. So thank you to you. Thank you for the attendance in the room and on the call. I want to repeat the timeline. We are talking about actions that are just beginning to start around the globe, the G7 meeting. We want you to see that as the beginning, not the end. So amplify that, share it on social media, on all of your social media accounts, talk about it, understand why we're doing it there. It's the center of power. We want to talk, re-emphasize and amplify the call to action. The call to action is join us in Germany, if you can, of course. If you can't, join us wherever you are, regional, whatever country, whatever part of the planet you are on, join us, and we're going to amplify these voices. On the signal call, and over the next couple of days, our media and messaging teams will come out with the correct unifying message that will tie all the actions together. But obviously, we encourage you to be creative, be disruptive, be innovative. Don't be silent at all. Join other organizations is one of the call to actions. If you don't join XR, if you haven't joined Scientist Rebellion, if you haven't joined Endergalender, La Via Campesina in South America, any one of the organizations, please join an organization. Don't sit on your hands, open your mouth, wave your hands, join organizations. But I want to end by speaking directly to the Global North. The people in the Global North, the activists from the Global North here, and the organizations represented. Remember, that is the Global South-led campaign, but we are in partnership with people on the Global North. Understand the privilege that you have, the privilege of resource, the privilege of position, the privilege of agency, and the privilege of whiteness. These can be tools in your hand. They're not burdens or chains around your neck. They can be tools that can be used effectively to give this campaign gravitas, to give it direction, to give it impetus, and speak truth to power in those centers. You are in the centers of power in Zurich, in Munich, in the UK, in Paris, in London, in Germany. Use that position. Go to those offices, go to those buildings. We are in solidarity, but this is an existential crisis. We fight for our very existence. We can't do it alone. We do it in collaboration with the global North, global South, and indigenous peoples across the world. So we are in unit. We always say this, we are all in the boat together, but we're not in the same storm. And some people are in yachts, some people are in big ships, and we are in rubber dinghies. So we rely on the collaborative effort of everyone in unison, because we are in solidarity as comrades, because it's one planet, one earth. So global justice now. I'm sure we've given everyone a chance. I hope I've covered all of the issues. Kathy, any ending words from you?
Just to say thank you, Annette, for putting the link to the MAPA call to action in the chat. Please feel free to open that. And I'd just like to say a big thank you to our wonderful interpreters today. If you could, I'll unpin everybody here so that we can see our interpreters. Please put your pictures on and wave your hands. Today we have Steve, Mathieu, Patricia, Sarah, and Catherine providing us this fantastic service for free. They do it. I think some of them, we practically employ them full time now. We see them come again and again. And thank you so much. We need you.
Thank you very much to everyone.